It's not even come across my desk. I don't think we're in a position to want to go down that road. That's my opinion. That's not.
The Cleveland Browns media machine has a problem. A glaring, undeniable, absolutely catastrophic problem. And that problem has a name. Shedeur Sanders is putting on shoulder pads, lining up in mandatory minicamp, and the same press corps that spent months trying to bury him is now scrambling to redirect the conversation toward a quarterback controversy that does not exist, and toward a player named Brandon Sorsby who has no business anywhere near this roster. The establishment does not want you focused on what is actually happening on that practice field in Berea. They want you distracted. They want you confused. They want you arguing about a supplemental draft candidate with a documented gambling addiction, instead of watching Shedeur Sanders, number 8, walk into that facility and begin the process of changing the entire direction of this franchise. Welcome back. This is hot news, and today we are ripping the doors off the Cleveland Browns media narrative and exposing every single angle they are trying to hide from you before mandatory minicamp even gets off the ground.
Shedeur's better than he was last year, right? And he's actually getting reps in practice instead of throwing to the ball boys like we saw last year. And then also,
let me be entirely clear about what is at stake here, because this is not a casual conversation. This is not a light afternoon take. This is the moment where the 2026 Cleveland Browns season either gets defined by a young, talented, ascending quarterback who has earned every single snap he is about to take, or it gets swallowed alive by the same recycled noise machine that has been tormenting this fan base for years. Mandatory minicamp is a 3-day event, Tuesday through Thursday, and for the first time in this entire offseason process, every single practice is open to the media, every single one. That means the reporters who have been cherry-picking one out of every 3 OTA practices and using that incomplete picture to manufacture a quarterback controversy are now going to be forced to watch the full picture unfold in real time. And the full picture, based on everything that has been reported from those OTA sessions, is that Shedeur Sanders is better. He is more consistent. He is more prepared. He is showing up with shoulder pads and the kind of urgency that only a player who knows exactly what this moment means can bring. The noise around Brandon Sorsby, the noise around Deshaun Watson reclaiming a starting job, the noise about a dreaded quarterback competition dragging into training camp, all of it is a deliberate, ruthless attempt by the Cleveland Browns media establishment to dilute the story of what Shedeur Sanders is actually building right now.
The actual season.
I'm not dodging that, Ken. I think it's both. I think it's a combination of both.
That's fine.
Let us start with the facts on the ground, because you deserve the full picture, not the edited version. The Cleveland Browns hosted their mandatory minicamp, and Shedeur Sanders showed up in shoulder pads. That detail matters more than people are giving it credit for. Last year, Shedeur was not getting live reps against the starting defense. He was not getting the kind of competitive practice environment that develops a quarterback's timing, rhythm, and decision-making under pressure. He was, by all accounts from reporters who covered those sessions, essentially throwing to ball boys while the real work happened elsewhere. That era is over. That era is dead and buried. This week, Shedeur Sanders is going up against the starting secondary. He is going up against Denzel Ward. He is going up against Jared Verse, who showed up to Media Day with the kind of energy that tells you everything you need to know about what this defense is going to bring. Jared Verse checked into that facility and made it crystal clear that he is not here to ease anybody into the season. He is here to compete. He is here to make this team something it has not been in a very long time. And the fact that Shedeur Sanders is now being tested by that level of competition, in pads, in mandatory sessions, against the first-team defense, is the single most important development of this entire Browns offseason. Not the Brandon Sorsby conversation, not the Deshaun Watson rust-shaking narrative. Shedeur Sanders in shoulder pads against the starting secondary. That is the story. Now, the Cleveland Browns media establishment, and I want to be specific here, because this is not a vague accusation. The reporters and analysts who cover this team have spent the better part of this offseason constructing a narrative that Todd Monken does not know who his starting quarterback is. They have leaned into every inconsistent practice rep, every back-and-forth day between Shedeur and Deshaun Watson, and used it to argue that this team is rudderless at the most important position on the field. And some of that reporting is grounded in real observations. Todd Monken himself said, on the record, that his opinion changes by the day. One day Deshaun has a good day, the next day it is Shedeur, and back and forth it goes. The media has taken that admission and turned it into a 5-alarm fire, but here is what they are deliberately leaving out of that framing. The reason Shedeur Sanders has not been able to fully separate himself in OTAs is because OTAs are a structurally incomplete evaluation environment. The media was only present for 1 out of every 3 practices each week during that voluntary phase. 1 out of 3. That means for every practice session where Shedeur looked inconsistent or Deshaun looked sharp, there were 2 other sessions nobody from the press corps witnessed. The evaluation has been incomplete by design, and now that mandatory minicamp forces the full picture into the open, the same establishment that manufactured the controversy is going to have to watch it get dismantled in real time. But before we get there, I want to address the most insulting part of this entire offseason conversation, because it is the part that reveals exactly what the Cleveland Browns media establishment thinks of the people watching this franchise. The Brandon Sorsby push. The idea that a player with a documented gambling addiction, who went through rehab, whose injunction to return to Texas Tech and earn $5 million did not go his way, who is now potentially facing the supplemental draft as his only remaining path to professional football. The idea that this player should be on the Cleveland Browns' radar as a solution at quarterback is not just irresponsible. It is an absolute insult to every single person who has invested emotionally in this team's rebuild. And the reporters pushing that conversation, Tony Grossi and others in the Cleveland Browns media circle, are doing it with a straight face, as if the franchise does not already have a young quarterback in Shedeur Sanders who has earned the right to run this offense. The audacity of that narrative is breathtaking. Don't take my word for it. Here is what Todd Monken said when asked directly about Brandon Sorsby at a recent public appearance.
It's not even come across my desk. I don't think we're in a position to want to go down that road. That's my opinion. That's not.
He said it, with cameras rolling. It hasn't even come across my desk. I don't think we're in a position to go down that road. That is the head coach of the Cleveland Browns shutting down the Brandon Sorsby conversation with one sentence. One sentence. And yet the media establishment kept pushing it. They kept floating the name. They kept treating it as a legitimate organizational consideration. That is not journalism. That is noise manufacturing. That is the establishment doing exactly what it always does when a young quarterback starts to look like the real thing. It creates a distraction. It floods the zone with alternative narratives, and it hopes the audience loses track of the actual story. The actual story is Shedeur Sanders. The actual story is number 8 walking into that facility, putting on shoulder pads, and preparing to face the starting defense of the 2026 Cleveland Browns in a mandatory setting for the very first time. That is the story. That has always been the story.
Shedeur's better than he was last year, right? And he's actually getting reps in practice instead of throwing to the ball boys like we saw last year. And then also,
now let me take you through the 4 layers of this situation, because each one is more damning than the last. And I want every single person watching this video to understand the full scope of what is happening here. The first layer is the tactical reality of this quarterback competition. And I use the word competition loosely, because what is actually happening is not a competition between 2 equals. It is a transition. It is the gradual, inevitable handover of a starting job from a recovering veteran to a younger, healthier, more prepared quarterback who has been developing in real time. Deshaun Watson is still shaking off rust. That is the phrase the reporters keep using, and it is accurate. He does look physically healthy. He is moving well. But there have been moments in these OTA sessions, moments that the reporters who were present have described in detail, where you see the Deshaun Watson from the 2024 season, the one coming off a suspension, coming off a shoulder injury, struggling with timing and rhythm and the kind of instinctive decision-making that separates a starting quarterback from a placeholder. Those moments are not rust. Those moments are a player who has been away from competitive football for a significant stretch of time trying to rediscover something that may not come back as quickly as everyone hoped. And meanwhile, Shedeur Sanders is getting better. Shedeur Sanders is getting real reps. Shedeur Sanders is, by the account of every credible observer who has been in those sessions, more advanced as a quarterback right now than he was at any point during his first year in the building. That is not a minor detail. That is the entire story. The second layer is the pattern of behavior from the Cleveland Browns media establishment, and this is where I need you to pay close attention, because this is not new. This franchise has a long and brutal history of quarterback situations that got mismanaged, misreported, and ultimately turned into catastrophic decisions that set the organization back years. The reporters who cover this team have institutional memory of those failures, and instead of using that memory to advocate for stability and patience with a young quarterback who is clearly developing, they are using it as justification for perpetual chaos. Every time there is a new name floating around the league, a veteran looking for a roster spot, a supplemental draft candidate, a reclamation project, Some segment of the Cleveland Browns media establishment immediately starts asking whether that player should be in the mix. It happened before Shedeur was drafted. It happened during the draft process. It is happening now with Brandon Sorsby. The pattern is undeniable. The pattern is deliberate. And the pattern has a specific identifiable effect. It keeps the fan base in a permanent state of anxiety about the quarterback position, which makes it harder for any individual player to establish himself as the unquestioned starter, which creates the exact conditions that allow the establishment to keep manufacturing controversy indefinitely. The third layer is the enabler complicity, and I want to name it directly. When Todd Monken himself says that the Brandon Sorsby conversation has not come across his desk, and the media keeps pushing it anyway, that tells you something specific about the relationship between the coaching staff and the press corps covering this team. The head coach is not driving this narrative. The head coach has his quarterbacks. He has said publicly that he likes the quarterbacks he has. He has said that the Sorsby situation is a slippery slope he has no interest in going down. And yet the narrative persists. Why? Because the narrative serves a purpose for the people generating it. It generates clicks, it generates debate, it generates the kind of engagement that keeps a media outlet relevant in a slow news cycle. The cost of that engagement is paid entirely by Shedeur Sanders, who has to walk into a facility every single day and perform at a high level, while a segment of the media covering his team is simultaneously pushing the idea that a supplemental draft candidate should be brought in to compete with him. That is not a neutral environment for a young quarterback to develop in. That is a deliberately hostile one. The fourth layer is the cost to Shedeur Sanders personally, and this is the one that I think gets overlooked most consistently in these conversations. Let me be entirely clear. Shedeur Sanders is the wronged party in this situation. He is the player who was drafted by this franchise, who showed up and did the work, who endured an offseason where he was not getting the competitive reps he needed to develop, who watched the media spend months constructing narratives around every other possible quarterback solution except the one already in the building, and who has responded to all of it by showing up to mandatory minicamp in shoulder pads, ready to face the starting defense, ready to prove every single skeptic wrong. That is not the behavior of a player who is cracking under the pressure of a manufactured controversy. That is the behavior of a player who has internalized the noise and decided to answer it on the field. And the field, starting this week, is mandatory. The field, starting this week, is the full picture. And the full picture is going to be very, very difficult for the Cleveland Browns media establishment to spin.
The actual season.
I'm not dodging that, Ken. I think it's both. I think it's a combination of both.
That's fine.
Now I want to talk about the specific reporter dynamic that is driving the most damaging part of this narrative, because there is a direct line between what Tony Grossi and the broader Cleveland Browns media circle have been pushing and the absurdity of the Sorsby conversation reaching the level of public discourse it has reached. When a player has a documented gambling addiction, has gone through rehab, has had his legal attempt to return to college football and earn a $5 million contract fail in court, and is now looking at the supplemental draft as his only remaining avenue into professional football, that player is not a solution to a quarterback competition. That player is a liability. And the head coach of the Cleveland Browns said exactly that. He said it is a slippery slope. He said he has seen what happens in other sports when players get banned for life over gambling situations. He said irrespective of talent, the situation the player put himself in makes this a road he has no interest in traveling. That is a definitive statement from the man who runs the football operation on the field. And the media kept pushing the story anyway. Here is what I want you to sit with for a second. The same establishment that is pushing the Brandon Sorsby narrative is the same establishment that has been characterizing the Shedeur Sanders situation as a quarterback controversy rather than a quarterback transition. Those two things are connected. If you can keep the audience believing that the starting quarterback job is genuinely up for grabs, you can keep inserting new names into the conversation indefinitely. And if you can keep inserting new names into the conversation, you can keep the story alive long after the football itself has answered the question. Shedeur Sanders is going to answer this question on the field. He is going to answer it in these 3 days of mandatory minicamp. He is going to answer it in training camp. He is going to answer it in the preseason. And every single time he answers it, the establishment is going to find a new angle to keep the controversy alive, because the controversy is more valuable to them than the truth. Let me also address the jersey number situation directly, because it matters symbolically, even if it seems like a minor detail. Shedeur Sanders is wearing number 8 for the Cleveland Browns. Number 8, that is not the number of a backup quarterback. That is not the number of a player who is auditioning for a roster spot. That is the number of a player who has been assigned an official identity within this franchise, who has walked into that facility with a name on his back and a number on his chest, and who is now being evaluated against the starting defense for the first time in a mandatory setting. Jared Verse walked into that same facility on Media Day and said he cannot wait to see everybody and that this team is about to change the season. Let's change the season. Those were his exact words. And the energy he brought to that moment, the urgency, the confidence, the absolute refusal to treat this as just another off-season obligation, that is the energy that Shedeur Sanders is going to be tested against this week. That is the environment where the real evaluation begins. Now, there is a specific accusation that the media establishment has been making about this quarterback situation that I want to address head-on because it is the most intellectually dishonest part of the entire narrative. The accusation is that because neither Shedeur Sanders nor Deshaun Watson has been able to fully separate himself during OTAs, the competition is genuinely open and neither player has shown enough to be declared the starter. Here is why that framing is deliberately misleading. OTAs are not a full evaluation. The media was present for 1 out of every 3 practices. 1 out of 3. The coaches saw all 3. The coaches saw what happened on the days the press corps was not in the building. And the coaches have not declared this competition over because they are managing a roster situation that requires them to maintain the appearance of an open competition for as long as possible. Not because the football itself has not already started to show them an answer. Todd Monken said his opinion changes by the day. But he also said he wants somebody to take the reins in mandatory minicamp so he can go into training camp with a number 1 guy. That is not the statement of a coach who genuinely believes he has 2 equal starting quarterbacks. That is the statement of a coach who is waiting for one of his quarterbacks to do something undeniable in a high-stakes setting. And mandatory minicamp, with the full media presence with the starting defense in pads, is that setting. Don't take my word for it. Here is the exact moment a reporter asked whether Shedeur is elevating himself enough to become the number 1 quarterback. And listen to what the analyst on the ground said. Shedeur's better than he was last year. And he's actually getting reps in practice instead of throwing to the ball boys like we saw last year. Let that sink in for 1 second. He is better than he was last year. He is getting real reps. He is no longer being kept away from the competitive environment that develops a quarterback. That is the admission from a reporter who has been in those sessions. That is the ground-level confirmation that the narrative the establishment has been selling, that this is a wide-open competition with no clear leader, is incomplete at best and deliberately misleading at worst. Shedeur Sanders is better. Shedeur Sanders is getting the reps. And the only question left is whether mandatory minicamp is the moment where he takes the final step and makes the answer undeniable for everyone watching. Let me render my verdict on each of the 3 storylines that are going to define this mandatory minicamp, because I want to go on record before these 3 days play out so that you can hold me accountable to exactly what I am saying right now. On the Shedeur Sanders starting job question, Shedeur Sanders is going to emerge from this mandatory minicamp as the clear number 1 quarterback heading into training camp. I am not hedging that. I am not qualifying it. The trajectory from last year's ball boy throwing sessions to this year's shoulder pad reps against the starting secondary is a one-directional line. He is better. He is more prepared. He is operating in a real competitive environment for the first time. And the coaches who have watched all 3 practices every week during OTAs, not just the one the media was allowed to see, are already seeing something that the press corps has not been able to fully document yet. When mandatory minicamp forces the full picture into view, the answer is going to be Shedeur Sanders. It has been Shedeur Sanders. The only people who have not been willing to say it out loud are the ones with a financial interest in keeping the controversy alive. On the Deshaun Watson situation, Deshaun Watson is a professional. He is working. He is showing up. He does look physically healthy, and that is genuinely encouraging for a player who has been through as much physical adversity as he has over the past several years. But physically healthy and ready to be the starting quarterback of an NFL franchise in 2026 are 2 different things. The moments that reporters have described from OTA sessions, the moments where you see flashes of the Watson from 2024, the one coming off the suspension and the shoulder injury, those moments are not going to disappear in 3 days of mandatory minicamp. Rust does not shake off on a deadline. Watson's best contribution to this franchise in 2026 may be exactly what he is doing right now, pushing Shedeur Sanders in practice, forcing him to compete at a high level every single day, and preparing him for the kind of pressure he is going to face once the regular season begins. That is a valuable role. That is an honorable role. but it is not the starting quarterback role. On the Brandon Sorsby conversation, it is over. Todd Monken killed it. The head coach of the Cleveland Browns said it has not come across his desk, said it is a slippery slope, said he likes the quarterbacks he already has. The supplemental draft is Sorsby's only remaining path to professional football, and the Cleveland Browns are not going to be the franchise that walks down that road. The media establishment can keep pushing the name, but the football operation has already answered the question. What they cannot keep doing, and what I am calling out directly on this channel, is using the Sorsby narrative as a tool to undermine the Shedeur Sanders story, because that is what it has become. It is not a legitimate football conversation. It is a distraction mechanism, and the people deploying it know exactly what they are doing. Now let me talk about Jared Verse for a moment, because his presence at this minicamp is one of the most underreported developments of this entire offseason, and it connects directly to the Shedeur Sanders story in a way that the establishment has completely failed to contextualize. Jared Verse is a pass rusher. Jared Verse is the kind of player who, in a live competitive practice setting, is going to test a quarterback's ability to process information quickly, get the ball out on time, and make decisions under genuine pressure. And the fact that Shedeur Sanders is going to be facing Jared Verse in these mandatory sessions, in pads, at full speed, with the starting defense aligned against him, is not a threat to the Shedeur Sanders narrative. It is the proof of it. Because the only way you prove you are ready to be a starting quarterback in the National Football League is by standing in the pocket when a player like Jared Verse is coming at you and making the right decision anyway. That is the test. That is the crucible. And Shedeur Sanders is walking into it willingly, with number 8 on his chest, with shoulder pads on, and with the kind of preparation that comes from a full off-season of actually getting real reps. This is the part of the story the press release skipped. This is the part of the story that the Cleveland Browns media establishment does not want to be the headline. Because if Shedeur Sanders walks out of this mandatory minicamp having dominated the starting defense across 3 full days of practice, there is no more controversy to manufacture. There is no more Sorsby conversation to float. There is no more back-and-forth Watson versus Shedeur narrative to sustain. There is just a young quarterback who did what young quarterbacks who are ready to start do. He took the job. And the entire 3-ring circus of noise that has surrounded this franchise's quarterback situation for the past several months collapses under the weight of that simple, undeniable, mathematical reality. Let me also address the coaching staff's role in this situation, because Todd Monken has been placed in an almost impossible position by the media narrative, and I want to give him credit for the one thing he has done consistently right throughout this entire process. He has not given the media the definitive answer they are fishing for. He has not declared a starter. He has not closed the competition prematurely. And while the media has used that restraint as evidence of uncertainty and indecision, the more accurate interpretation is that Monken is doing exactly what a good head coach does. He is letting the competition play out in a mandatory high-stakes setting before making a declaration that will define the entire direction of his team's season. That is not weakness. That is patience. That is the kind of disciplined process management that separates coaches who get the most out of their quarterbacks from coaches who make premature declarations that create unnecessary locker room dynamics. The mandatory minicamp is Monken's evaluation window, and based on everything that has been reported from the OTA sessions, he is going to like what he sees from Shedeur Sanders when the full picture is finally on display. Now here is the callback I want you to hear, because this is the clip that nobody in the Cleveland Browns media establishment is going to play for you, because of what it proves about the real direction of this quarterback situation. This is the moment when the same analyst who confirmed Shedeur is better and getting real reps was asked point-blank whether Deshaun Watson has failed to elevate himself or whether Shedeur is simply rising so fast that the question has answered itself. I'm not dodging that. I think it's both. I think it's a combination of both. Both. It is a combination of both. Shedeur Sanders rising and Deshaun Watson not elevating himself. That is the analyst's honest assessment from the ground. That is not a manufactured take. That is not a hot sports opinion designed to generate clicks. That is a reporter who has been in those sessions telling you on camera that this situation is moving in one direction. Shedeur Sanders is rising. Deshaun Watson is not keeping pace. And the mandatory minicamp is the moment where that gap becomes undeniable to everyone, including the establishment that has been doing everything in its power to keep you from seeing it clearly. Shedeur Sanders is right now, today in Berea, Ohio, putting on shoulder pads and walking onto a practice field to face the starting defense of the Cleveland Browns in a mandatory setting for the first time. He is wearing number 8. He is getting real reps. He is better than he was last year. And the entire Cleveland Browns media establishment, with all of its noise and all of its manufactured controversy and all of its Brandon Sorsby distractions, cannot change what is about to happen on that field. The field does not care about the narrative. The field does not care about the press release. The field cares about who can stand in the pocket when Jared Verse is coming, process the coverage, and deliver the football accurately under pressure. And based on everything we know, based on the trajectory, based on the reps, based on the honest assessments from the people who have actually been watching these sessions, the answer to that question is already written. Shedeur Sanders is the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. The mandatory minicamp is just the moment where the proof becomes too loud for anyone to talk over. Here is the forced choice I am leaving you with today, and I want you to answer it in the comments right now, because this is the question that everything we have talked about today comes down to. Do you believe Shedeur Sanders emerges from this mandatory minicamp as the undisputed #1 quarterback heading into training camp? Or do you think the Cleveland Browns media establishment is going to find a way to keep the controversy alive no matter what happens on that practice field? That is the question, not whether Shedeur is talented enough, not whether Deshaun Watson deserves another chance, not whether Brandon Sorsby has any business being in this conversation. The question is whether the truth of what happens on that field is going to be allowed to speak for itself, or whether the noise machine is going to drown it out one more time. Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know where you stand. This is hot news. If you are not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell, because we are going to be covering every single development out of this mandatory minicamp as it happens. The story is moving fast. The field does not wait, and neither do we.